I'd like to invite Gordon Davies. He's the Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for Corporate Development of OpenText to come and introduce our speaker today. Gordon.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. On behalf of OpenText, I would like to thank everyone for being here today. We're very proud to be sponsoring the Provincial Leaders Speakers Series. If you'll allow me just a couple of moments on OpenText. OpenText is Canada's largest software company, and we're proudly headquartered here in Waterloo. What started 30 years ago as a project to digitize the Oxford English Dictionary, today OpenText is the world leader in enterprise information management with customers in just about every country in the world. Waterloo and Ontario remain the foundation that has helped us grow over the years to a publicly traded company on the TSX and NASDAQ with revenues of almost $3 billion a year and with approximately 13,000 employees worldwide. And we're still growing, particularly in Waterloo and Ontario. Thank you. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce today's speaker. As Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, he spearheads the government strategy to make Ontario open for business. His priorities include cutting red tape, reducing business costs, and promoting fair and balanced trade. Since first being elected as a member of the Provincial Parliament in 2011, he has been a strong voice for business and communities throughout Ontario. So please welcome to the stage the Honourable Todd Smith.
Thanks very much, Gordon. It was great having lunch with you here today, and it's great to be in Kitchener-Waterloo again. Great to be sitting at the table with a couple of local radio stars, Ian and Greg. Look forward to being on their show on 570 a little bit later on. Maybe they could teach me a couple of things about broadcasting, I'm not sure. For those of you who don't know, I come from Bay of Quinte, which is in eastern Ontario, Belleville, Quinte West, Trenton, Prince Edward County region. I've been elected now for 8 years, and I am a former broadcaster. Could you tell? For many years, I was the news director at Quinte Broadcasting radio stations, and I was also the voice of the hated Belleville Bulls of the Ontario Hockey League. Yeah. We did have a lot of fun when we came to Kitchener and played the Rangers. I don't think we won many games here. Might have won a few fights now and then, but we didn't win many games. Kitchener's doing well. But I'm sorry to hear about your Rangers this year. Yeah. There's always next year. That's right. That's the silver lining in these stories. Great to see our local mayors who are here and joining us today. Thanks for coming out. Also great to see my colleagues, the three amigos from the Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge area. Amy Fee is here, and Belinda Carajolios, and also Mike Harris Jr. is here. So great to have you guys with me here today. We've been a busy bunch of MPPs. We've been doing a lot over the last 9 months that we've been the government of Ontario and trying to make Ontario open for business. And that's not just a bumper sticker slogan or a license plate slogan or a road sign slogan. We actually mean it when we say that. We want to make Ontario open for business. And as Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, and the Minister responsible for red tape reduction, and the Government House Leader, it's something that I take very seriously, and I know all of my colleagues do, making sure that we're getting Ontario open for business and open for jobs. I'm here to talk to you about being open for business today, and particularly about how our government is tackling the red tape challenge. It's a serious problem in Ontario. And from the Premier on down, we've made it clear that we need to make Ontario more competitive by eliminating unnecessary regulations and by making it cheaper, easier, and faster for companies to comply with the regulations that we actually do need in the province to keep our workers safe and our communities healthy. But we want to lower the business cost to help Ontario businesses become more competitive locally and globally, because let's admit it, we are competing on a global stage. Some people will like to cry out and say that we're only cutting red tape and reducing business costs for big business, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The fact of the matter is As you in this room probably know, small businesses are hit the hardest by regulatory burden because they don't have the capacity to navigate the complex system that has been created here in Ontario. So by cutting red tape, we're not only helping the job creators we see in the room today, we're helping job creators like Tony's Barber Shop and Quality Mechanical back in my home community of Belleville and Trenton, because they're now able to spend less time on paperwork in their businesses, burdensome over-regulation and paperwork that's taking them away from growing their business. And when it comes to red tape, the problem is real. A research paper published last October by scholars at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto shows just how bad things are in Ontario right now. It shows that Ontario businesses are paying $33,000 per year to comply with regulations, by far the most in any jurisdiction in North America. Think about that for a minute. For a small business owner, $33,000 is another employee. It's a pretty big deal. And again, it's much higher than the costs in other provinces. And the problem with Ontario's heavy regulatory burden goes well beyond our country's borders. Job creators have told us about a troubling trend, the widening gap between Ontario and the United States we compete with for investments. Well, every year, regulatory burden has been getting heavier here. It's getting lighter in other jurisdictions, and this has had an impact. Probably the best example that I can give you, and we've been spending a lot of time on the auto sector since I've taken over this portfolio, is FCA, Fiat Chrysler, just announced last month that they're investing $4.5 billion just across the Detroit River in Michigan. $4.5 billion. They got the permitting and all the applications that they needed in 60 days. For that same kind of investment to occur here in Ontario, it's taking over 3 years right now. So think about that. 60 days versus 3 years, and as you folks know who are in business, time is money, and that's why we're doing everything we can to reduce the burdensome over-regulation. You know, many companies haven't been investing to modernize or expand operations in Ontario. They've been taking their new operations across that Detroit River or to southern states. Just look at the serious erosion in our industrial base that's occurred. We've lost 320,000 manufacturing jobs between 2003 to 2009, and we haven't seen any net gain since then. So we need to reverse that erosion, and we need to keep growing good-paying jobs here in Ontario. We need to make sure that along with those $14 an hour jobs that we're also creating the environment for $24 and $25 an hour jobs too. We also need to face a painful reality about our economy, and my apologies to those from Scotiabank who may be here, but we aren't richer than we think. It's a real eye-opener, actually, to compare how Ontario's economy is doing with the rest of North America. We like to think that we're in the economic big leagues, right up there with New York and California, but the numbers show something different. The latest figures on GDP per person compared every Canadian province and territory in 50 U.S. states and the District of Columbia, so 64 jurisdictions in North America in all. And we're not 1, 2, 3, or 4, we're actually number 46 out of 64. So New York ranked 3rd, California ranked 9th, Ontario ranks 46th. So we're way down there in the rankings with Oklahoma and Montana. So we've got to do better. That has to change. Our government has different priorities than those who came before us, and clearly we've been taking a real targeted approach to reducing red tape since we've been the government of Ontario. You know, we refuse to accept that Ontario is going to remain a have-not province, and we refuse to accept that good-paying jobs are going to continue to leave our province, and we refuse to accept that our kids will have fewer opportunities here than we did growing up. So that's why we're getting down to business, and there will be our first budget coming, as Vic Fideli would say, or I think maybe our Treasury Board President, who's going to be here next week, I understand, Peter Bethlen-Falvey. He would say that the budget is coming in 6 more sleeps. So we're all excited about that, and Minister Fideli is ready to deliver our vision in his first budget on Thursday of this coming week. We want to strengthen our public services. We're going to balance the budget in a responsible manner and keep fighting for jobs and creating good jobs and workers and industry in Ontario. When I look at this room, I see individuals and companies and organizations that are doing just that. You're training, investing in, and employing the workforce of tomorrow. And when I look at our government, I see a team that's committed to making sure it's easier for you in the greater Kitchener-Waterloo region to succeed. And that's why our government is committed to reducing that red tape that I've been talking about by 25%, not by the end of our mandate, but by the end of next year. So we're really focusing on making sure that we're eliminating the red tape that's going to matter for you in your business. We want to save businesses in Ontario $400 million in the cost of doing business by reducing that red tape by 25%. At the heart of our plan is the conviction that Ontario can once again be that great place to invest and grow and create jobs. And we know that if we eliminate those regulations that are burdensome, inefficient, and inflexible, or that are outdated, or duplicate federal or municipal regulations, we're going to do just that. So those are the types of regulations and over-regulation that we're targeting. The first of our red tape reduction packages, and I'm sure a number of you in the room hopefully breathed a sigh of relief when we brought in Bill 47, which was the Making Ontario Open for Business Act. We introduced it very early on. It passed just before Christmas last year, aimed at unwinding, reversing a lot of the changes that came with the Liberals' Bill 148. And also, a part of that as well was to reform the apprenticeship system to make it easier for businesses to go out and get the skilled tradespeople that they need, and changing the ratios that were involved. So it was a very, very important signal to send to the business community that we were going to be different, that we were listening, and we were acting and bringing in legislation that was going to make it easier for you to be competitive. Just this week, I was excited to have a piece of legislation pass, actually. Bill 66 finally passed, the Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act. We've been working on that since its introduction just before Christmas time, so I was really pleased that that received royal assent this week. That bill proposed over 30 different actions, reducing specific regulatory burdens across 13 different ministries. It included agri-food, it included manufacturing, of course construction, and the auto sector was thrilled with some of the steps that we took in Bill 66 as well. I know it's been a hot topic in this region, but certainly the open tendering issue was dealt with in Bill 66, and that's been very important to ensuring that the broader construction community can participate in infrastructure projects in this region that have slowed and gone way over budget as a result of some crazy things that happened about 6 years ago in Baden, not too far from here, on a Saturday morning. And I don't think I need to go deep into to that story and what that means, but we really are quite pleased on behalf of the folks who've been advocating for that. I know Belinda, Amy, and Mike have been strong proponents of unwinding that craziness that was occurring in that sector. So we're not going to stop there. We have a lot to do still on hitting those two ambitious targets, 25% and $400 million by 2020. We have a red tape bill that's going to be coming again in the fall, and we're working with many, many industries across government to ensure that legislation is going to include the elimination of those regulations that are costing you business and time. So we can have also one of the key things that we're doing with the red tape challenge that we have issued to all of our ministers is ensuring that while we're eliminating red tape on one side, we're not bringing in red tape through the back door as well. So we have a very good team that's keeping an eye on all of our ministries to ensure that that isn't happening. And we're looking forward to making a visible and meaningful difference to you when it comes to business costs. We've also taken a look at sector-by-sector approach here. Obviously, the auto sector, there were a lot of black clouds that were hanging out there when we took office. We knew that there were challenges in Oshawa with General Motors. We knew that FCA was having a difficult time. We've been engaged with our auto sector since we took office. That's why we were so quick to bring in Bill 47 and Bill 66, because we knew challenging times were there. It was great, by the way, to be in Cambridge last week for a much more happier occasion, and there are a number of mayors who are with us as well, and other local dignitaries, and certainly the three amigos from Kitchener-Waterloo were with me, and the Premier, as we announced a great new investment at Toyota Cambridge, and the RAV4 line that is up and running there, and it's really great for this region. So really super jobs. But one of the first things that we did was bring forward our auto plan, which is the first phase of our auto plan for Ontario. It's called Driving Prosperity, cleverly named, but it focuses on three main fronts, and these are the issues that the auto industry has talked to us about, issues that they felt that the Government of Ontario could address and should address, and we have addressed them. So it's competitiveness, it's innovation, and it's talent. Those are three areas that Ray Tanguay, the former auto czar in Canada, told us where we need to act, and the companies, the five major automakers that are operating in Ontario, told us that we needed to act as well. So it's a great plan, and has been well received by the auto sector as we continue to ensure that we're building the cars of the future here in Ontario, in a sector that's employing, when you include the supply chain, well over 200,000 men and women with good-paying jobs. So we are focused on making sure that Ontario is open for business. The Premier has actually put together an open for business office within the Cabinet Office. One of the Deputy Ministers reports directly to me as we try and make Ontario a more prosperous place and competitive place to do business, and we are going to continue down this road. As well, we want to make Ontario a friendlier place to do business. One of the things that struck me back when I was the critic for small business and red tape, I had the opportunity to go down. I don't know if my former colleague Rob Leone was with me for this luncheon or not, but we had the governor of South Carolina at the time, Nikki Haley, who was speaking in downtown Toronto. One of the things she said about 6 years ago struck me and has stuck with me ever since. She was talking about the fact that a lot of businesses, particularly in the auto sector, were moving to the southern states, and were moving to her state of South Carolina. And she, amusingly enough, said, whatever you're doing in Ontario, keep it up, because it's benefiting South Carolina. Which is not the message that a business community wants to hear, and certainly not the message that a Minister of Economic Development should want to hear, especially one for Ontario. But the other thing that she said that really struck me was when she became the governor of South Carolina, there was a real closed for business kind of attitude. Those inspectors that were going out there were looking to, put punitive measures, looking for fines, looking for companies that weren't complying with regulations, and then slapping them with some kind of a fine. We want to change our approach in Ontario and follow the route that Nikki Haley took when she was the governor of South Carolina. And this other message that she shared with us that day really stuck with me as well. She said people used to call in to the state capitol and they would say, "Good afternoon, it's South Carolina legislature." Probably not quite that accent, but And she changed the message for everybody who was picking up a phone that said, "It's a beautiful day in South Carolina. How can we make your day better?" And that's the kind of message that we want to send in Ontario. Sure, it's another one of those slogans, but I think it's important for those who want to do business in Ontario to know that they have a government that's listening, that's welcoming, that wants them to do business in Ontario. And I can tell you, Premier Ford and our team have been meeting with as many businesses as we possibly can to get them to locate and be the more welcoming jurisdiction that we want to be for business. So, having said all that, we look forward to many focus groups with all of you over the next little while as we look to reduce the regulatory burden in Ontario, make sure that our province is as competitive as it possibly can be. Kitchener-Waterloo and Cambridge are such interesting places because there's so many interesting things happening here. And Ian, I know we talk about it all the time, and you're a great promoter of this region, but it's a very diverse community when it comes to not just the people in it, but the types of businesses that are in this community as well. You have the manufacturing, You have the innovation and all the research that's going on, and it's a really, really important part of Ontario's economy. We recognize that. We recognize all of the great things that are happening in the universities and colleges in this area, ensuring that we're training the people for the jobs of the future, and this area is a leader when it comes to that. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of you here in Kitchener-Waterloo to make sure that all of Ontario is truly open for business and open for jobs. And thanks for having me here today.
I do appreciate you setting the stage for our discussion today. And as you point out, Waterloo Region has lots to offer in terms of the provincial economy, in terms of creating jobs and creating prosperity. And we look forward to hosting you. We've talked about this with your staff, of getting you down here to do some tours of the region so you can see firsthand some of the pieces that we have, and help arrange some of these roundtables so that you get that sense of the economy here in the region of Waterloo. Let me start, and it's broadly the budget, but deficits do matter to business. We recognize that there's not a bottomless pit, and so you've got a challenge in front of you as a government to deal with the deficit that the province that you've inherited. At the same time, investing in the economy and in jobs of the future is equally important. How are you, as your government, going to conceptually try and strike that balance of dealing with the deficit, but also creating or investing in the future?
So the budget comes out on Thursday. Thanks for having me in. It's great to be here.
You can break news here if you'd like.
No, clearly we did inherit a mess financially, and I think people know the fiscal situation that Ontario is in, faced with a $15 billion deficit, faced with a debt of $350 billion, and numbers that are quite scary, actually. So changes have to be made. We have to get our fiscal house in order, but we want to do that in a responsible way. We're not going to rush to balance the budget just for the sake of rushing to balance the budget, because we do have public services that we have to protect, and we're going to do that in a very responsible way. So I think, probably in an overarching way, that's what you can expect to see in Vic Fideli's first budget on Thursday. I think what we really need to focus on, if we want to protect those public sector jobs and those public services that we offer in Ontario, is to ensure that our private sector is thriving and doing as well as it possibly can. We've seen the number of public sector jobs outpacing private sector jobs significantly, increases in the public sector salaries outpacing private sector salaries by double-digit percentage points. So we need to ensure that we're doing everything that we can for our private sector to start to come back and protect the public services that we rely on. So investing in key areas is so important. Obviously here, and I know we'll probably talk about infrastructure in this region is very important. We've made some announcements over the last couple of weeks on infrastructure. We've made a couple of announcements on education, post-secondary education, more to come on that, but making sure that we're training people for the jobs of the future is so key to ensuring that you have a robust private sector. And there are a lot of companies that are now out there south of the border, in spite of some of the doom and gloom that I may have shared during my remarks there, that are looking at Ontario and seeing something different. And the one thing that they're seeing in Ontario is talent. And we do have talent. We're continuing to develop that talent and making sure that when companies are looking at locating here in Ontario, that they're going to have that resource for many years to come.
It's a good follow-on to the next question, and I had the privilege of speaking at your caucus retreat when it was here in town, and I talked a lot about connecting the corridor, and in particular, all-day two-way go and having that fast, frequent service, and it's really driving a number of things, getting goods and services to market by unclogging the road network that's so important to manufacturing and to the goods that are produced here in the province, but also getting that talent to where the jobs are. And I see Manulife and OpenText and companies that are having people go back and forth between Toronto. And again, I'm not asking you to break news on when all-day two-way go is going to happen, although if you'd like to do that, we'd be happy to hear it. But how does moving talent to where the jobs are now and where they're going to be in the future tie into the work that you're doing as economic development? Because companies that are going to invest here need to know that they can get people to where the jobs are.
Yeah, and I did appear at a roundtable here a few weeks back, and that was one of the things that really struck me was just how many people were coming from Toronto to Kitchener-Waterloo every day. I think, in Belleville, in Bay of Quinte region, there are people from that region that go to Toronto for work every day, but I was surprised to hear just how many people were coming from Toronto to work in Kitchener-Waterloo every day. So clearly, it's important to make sure that the pipeline exists. When people talk about this great tech sector we have in Ontario now, Toronto and Kitchener-Waterloo end up being sort of meshed together, and clearly, if that is the way we're going to approach this, as selling Ontario's value proposition, we have to make sure that the mobility is there, that people can get to work quickly. So, there have been some steps that have been taken already. I think we brought back the evening express train, and we added 25% more capacity on some of the GO trains that are coming. I know that Minister Urick, our Minister of Transportation, has been brought up to speed, no pun intended, by our three local members who continue to advocate for the all-day two-way GO, and it's really important to the success of this region and getting those folks who go both ways to the intended destinations in a time that meets their schedules. So let's put it that way. But there's good, exciting news on the future of that.
Well, that's good to hear. It's one of those things that can really drive jobs and economic growth for the entire province, is connecting both ends of the innovation corridor. One of the strengths of this region, we talked about this a little bit at lunch, and I know in talking with your staff, as a community, we work very collaboratively together, and the Prosperity Council, which is really our two chambers, the Cambridge Chamber, Greater KW Chamber, the Economic Development Corporation, and Communitech, work very, very cooperatively around, as well as our universities. And you talked about University of Waterloo and Laurier and Conestoga and our municipalities. When we look at this region, we have a lot to offer in terms of how we do cooperate and collaborate and have industry working with academia and the innovation sector. You've only been in the saddle for a few months, but what are your initial thoughts around this region and what you can take to share with the rest of the province about how we do things here and how it's creating economic wealth and new jobs of the future?
Yeah, so some of the biggest tech companies in the country are located right in this region, right, creating billions and billions of dollars in wealth for our province, and I think that needs to be celebrated, and we need to continue to build on that. There's no question about it, and the collaboration is so important. It seems like you've struck a pretty good balance here on making sure that those who should be part of this conversation and this kind of vision are a part of it. We have to do the same thing within the government of Ontario. I think for many years, and you've heard this term, and I hate to use it, but government ministries have been operating in silos. They haven't been talking to one another. One of the great things with our government is that we're taking a pan-government approach to everything that we're doing. So whether it's business supports in my ministry, we're working with the other ministries as well to make sure that we have a targeted approach that's outcome-based. There are metrics involved, and that hasn't happened in the past. Different ministries have operated independently of each other. The Premier has given us all mandate letters with very, very clear directives that we have to meet, but one of the things that we are doing is working together. One of the cool things, actually, quite honestly, and Rob Leone, my former colleague, can attest to this, is not that it's ever great to spend 15 years in opposition, but when you've spent so much time in opposition and then you finally get the opportunity to govern Ontario, you've made great friendships because you've had time to get to know each other. You're not a bunch of new politicians that have just kind of been plopped in and to different ministries and don't know each other. I'm great friends with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, and I'm great friends with Vic Fideli, our Minister of Finance. We've spent so much time in opposition together. Christine Elliott, our Minister of Health, and so it's really easy for us to communicate ministry to make sure that we're actually delivering results for the people of Ontario. Just an interesting dynamic, I think, that's a little bit unusual. Not that I ever want to spend 15 years in opposition again.
Well, you broke news. You don't want to be back in opposition. Let's go back to talent. You talked about transit and talent being two of the core pieces. It's certainly critical for the province's economic futures to have the right talent trained and with the right skills in place. And it's top of mind for every business sector. And we talked about this just before lunch. There are job openings in the region of Waterloo in every sector. Pick one, and there's manufacturing, technology, insurance. Go up and down the list. There are job openings. Here's what's getting the talent to where they need to get to. But also, what is how do we get them the right training and the right education and the right skills in place? One of the things that I'm always amazed with the region of Waterloo is there's a project that Communitech's leading called the Future of Work and Learning, and Mike Dowdy and Manulife are very much involved in that. Work is changing with every passing day. The skills that you need every passing day. You talked a little bit about that inside government, but as we think about how we're going to have to train our kids for the jobs of the future, but also retooling our workers as we go. Businesses are operating. Is that informing the work that you're doing in economic development of being able to have the workforce of the future while we continue to try and grow the economy right now?
Yeah, so we've been working across all ministries again to make sure that we have the outcomes that we want. We believe that, first of all, in post-secondary education, we need to be training our post-secondary students for jobs that exist and the needs that exist. I think certainly changing some of the red tape, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to apprentices is going to make it much easier to fill the huge demand that we have when it comes to skilled trades. And I think that was a very important first step that we took. But certainly making sure that we're matching education with the workforce. It's difficult because work is changing, and Mike is on the cutting edge of this with Manulife, and the workplace is changing as we were discussing during lunch. It's so interesting because you don't have to sit in an office anymore with 60 different cubicles. A lot of people are working remotely, they're working from home, they're working on the road, and that changes the way that we work. But as the government of Ontario, we have to focus on making sure that our young people are getting the skills that they need, and that starts in elementary school and continues right through the education spectrum, so that we're focused on STEM. We're focused on science, technology, engineering, math. Our kids have to know math, and they don't know math. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating as a parent that when my child is not a child anymore, she's 16 years old, so she's crazy, but she brings her math homework home, and I can't help her with it, and I know math, and the math that they're doing these days, just the kids can't learn it. Parents can't help them with it, so that's why we're going back to focusing on those 3 R's and making sure that the kids know their math and that they're ready, and science and technology, engineering, those are the jobs of the future. Coding, all of those things need to be introduced at an earlier age. Making sure there's co-ops available that aren't, they should be mandatory. Co-op programs should be mandatory. We need to make sure that we're exposing our children to the workplace as early as we possibly can, with the soft skills that they need to be good employees, because I think over the last number of years we've been letting our kids down. So there's been a real focus on that. Our Minister of Education, Lisa Thompson, has been harping on this for many months now.
Well, and I did mention that when I spoke to caucuses around the experiential learning pilot we're doing with Waterloo and Conestoga and Laurier around getting young, talented students from this region into, in particular, small and medium-sized business, where we don't have enough small businesses harnessing that talent and giving them young people experiences. So switching to small business, one of the issues, and I've been at the Chamber 8.5 years, Greg's been there for 100 years in Cambridge, but we always talk about how difficult it is for small business to do business with the provincial government. And one of the things, we hear this from tech, we hear it from across sectors. If I could only get that first contract from government to be your first revenue or your first contract, you can stretch that out and leverage that to go global. And that's what we want, is companies that can compete globally. Maybe just talk a little bit about small business. 98.5% of businesses would fall into that category. 65% of people are employed by those companies. What's the government going to be looking to do to try and make it easier for small business to do business with the Ontario government? and then look to grow those small businesses and create jobs.
Yeah, it was a big issue last time I was here for the roundtable in KW, and a lot of those who are working in the tech sector in particular were talking about the fact that they were doing great business with governments other than their own, which just seems so counterintuitive to the way it should be. Previous to being the Minister of Economic Development and Job Creation and Trade, which is a mouthful, I was the Minister of Government and Consumer Services, which is responsible for procurement. And Bill Walker, our good friend, is now the Minister of Government and Consumer Services. He was out with the President of the Treasury Board this week or last, talking about our new approach to procurement in Ontario and making sure that small and medium-sized Ontario companies, Canadian companies, can bid on government contracts. There are so many ways that, particularly in the tech sector, and one of the key mandates that we have is modernizing government and making sure that we're delivering government to the customers, the residents of Ontario, in a consumer-friendly manner. And right now, some of the ways that government operates are as old as Greg.
100 years old.
100 years old. So we need to ensure that that we're modernizing government, and there are so many different companies, many of them based here in Kitchener-Waterloo, that can help us modernize government. We do have a chief digital officer in the province of Ontario who's my former deputy minister. Her name is Hilary Hartley, and she's outstanding. She realizes that, as her Ontario Digital Service Office with their 80 employees is very effective, they're not going to be able to modernize government by themselves. So we need to procure services from companies that are operating right here in our neck of the woods to ensure that we're delivering the service that the people of Ontario expect.
I was at an event last night, and Giles Gerson was there as a deputy minister, and because we were talking about red tape, and I know you've touched on that, but maybe just well, no, you did, and I listened, but I think one of the things, one of the first meetings I had after the government was elected was with Monty McNaughton, and he came and his comment was, we're not doing red tape once or twice. It's going to be, and you made mention of this, that it's going to be an ongoing process. What's the mechanism for, because I think every individual business will say, here's a regulation that's really affected me, and Tony Lamantia and I talk about this all the time. There's manufacturer of Eastman that he helped with one specific regulation. What's the mechanism for, or how do we aggregate that so when there's something that's holding back a business or a sector, that we can feed that into the process? Our local MPPs, is there a formal process going to on the regulation and red tape part of what you're doing?
Yeah, because this is such a key priority for us, and we've set out targets that we have to achieve. We're going to need the help of a lot of different people to make this happen, and that includes all of you in this room. So Giles Gerson is the deputy minister that Ian speaks of. He's my deputy minister, reports to me from our Open for Business office that we have. Not only are we looking at sector-by-sector approaches like we did with the auto sector, we'll be looking at life sciences, we'll be looking at every sector, agriculture, agri-food. But one of the cool things that we have as well, and the Premier really wanted this, was a red tape SWAT team, he calls it. And so if you have an issue where maybe you have a large piece of equipment that you're trying to get into the country, and it's being held at the border, or you've just got an excessive piece of red tape that's really holding you back, some burdensome regulation that doesn't make any sense, and you overcoming that obstacle will help you create 100 jobs or 50 jobs or 10 jobs. This SWAT team is there to help you get through that obstacle and eliminate that red tape. So it's a very responsive team. So while we're working on things like an auto plan, and we're working on things like a life sciences plan and a housing plan and development plan, all these different plans, we also have this SWAT team that's there for you as well. So it's as simple as calling my office or Giles Gearson's office or Amy Fee, Belinda Caraholios, or Mike Harris Jr.'s office. Call them first.
Just almost out of time, but I want to do, it's timely, it's come up in the news, and maybe your personal thoughts. The revised NAFTA, Greg and I refuse to use MECA. We call it NAFTA 2 because we don't want to condone anything that Donald Trump has done in that file. But it hasn't not passed, certainly the Canadian Parliament, and it looks like it's in trouble in the U.S. Congress. How is that going to affect, does it affect the way Ontario is going to do business until it's passed? Like, is there a real risk in it, in there being delay in it coming into force?
Yeah, so there's a few issues with NAFTA 2 or USMCA or CUSMA or whatever. There's a few issues there. I mean, the federal government, obviously has been at this for a long time, and they are dealing with someone south of the border that's tough to predict the next move. But one of the things that's really troubling for our office is the fact that these steel and aluminum tariffs remain in place. They're having a real negative impact on businesses in Ontario. They're also having a negative impact on businesses south of the border. There's always the fear of the same Section 232 tariffs being put on the auto sector as well, which would be a devastating thing for businesses on both sides of the border too. The federal government was able to achieve a side letter on autos, but until the deal is actually ratified, we don't know exactly what that means. So, businesses want certainty. They want certainty. That's the one thing that the Premier and I have heard as we've traveled across the province and met with business owners almost on a daily basis. Look, we need some certainty. The damage that was done on the electricity file by the previous government makes it uncertain right now to do business in Ontario. That's why we're reviewing industrial rates. Back to Section 232 tariffs and NAFTA 2, until that's ratified, there's that uncertainty that exists. So we've been really pressuring the federal government, and let's face it, they've been distracted by some other things that have been happening on the Hill lately, but we've been really pushing the feds to focus on this Section 232 issue with steel and aluminum because it is having a negative impact on businesses here and jobs here in this province right now. I've talked to many who work in the auto sector, in the supply chain, those who use a lot of steel and aluminum, even in the craft beer industry, which we love so much. It's having a negative impact there too. So we're really pushing them to get back to the table, change up the reciprocal tariffs that are in place. It's a bit of a complicated file, but we need them to do more to come to some kind of an agreement on this.